Welcome back, Year 3. This video is for Chapter 14 of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and it's called Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was! He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of beautiful plum-coloured velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly grey. And in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin there was a neat, small, pointed black beard, a goatee. And his eyes were most marvellously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of life! He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, and taking everything in with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and called out, "Welcome, my little friends! Welcome to the factory!" His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward one at a time, please," he called out, "and bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents. How nice! Come in, come in. That's right, step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next girl to go forward, "is Veruca Salt." "My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was sort of a wart that you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father, how are you, sir? Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt, overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregarde and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined, and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well, so there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you? Yes, yes, I read all about it in this morning's papers. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad, so happy for you. And this, your grandfather, delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted, all right, excellent. Is this everybody in now? 5 children? Yes, good. Now, will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh dear me, no." Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look at them. Then as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are!" cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. That's right, it's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are these workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing that door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could have easily driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. "How lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know, and what a marvellous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasted coffee, and burnt sugar, and melting chocolate, and mints, and violet, and crushed hazelnuts, and apple blossom, and caramel, and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous gigantic machines were spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. Now this, my dear children, said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, this is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats and hats on the pegs over there? Then follow me. That's the way. Good. Everyone ready? Come on then. Here we go. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor, with the tails of his plum-coloured velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people when you came to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all, so you can imagine that there was a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get round today if you all dawdle like this." Soon he turned right off the main corridor into a slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie," whispered Grandpa Joe. "Notice how all these passages are sloping downwards," outcalled Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface." "Why's that?" somebody asked. "There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top," answered Mr. Wonka. "These rooms we are going to are enormous. They are larger than football fields. No building in the world would be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit, as long as I hollow it out." Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door in large letters it said, "The Chocolate Room." Okay, that's the end of chapter 14. I've got 10 questions for us for this chapter. So number 1, why was it strange that Willy Wonka was on his own when he came to greet everybody? Question 2, can you draw a picture of Mr. Wonka based on the description in the book and then write a little description about him next to your picture? Number 3, what animal is Willy Wonka compared to and why is this? Number 4, how does he greet the children? Number 5, why do you think Charlie was the last child to go into the factory? Number 6, can you predict how you think the tour of the factory will go? Number 7, what would happen if the workers went outside the factory and why? Number 8, once inside the factory, what could they hear in the distance? Number 9, why was there lots of pushing and shoving from the people that were inside the factory now? And number 10, can you write a short description of what you can see inside the factory so far, what they've seen so far? Okay, so that was chapter 14. You can watch the next video for chapter 15. Bye.